What if I told you there's a place where the walls whisper the date of your death? Would you believe it? Would you have the courage to go in? Marcus Hayes did, and what happened to him that night changed everything he thought he knew about reality, destiny, and the limits of what the government is capable of doing. Marcus accepted the easiest job of his life, guarding an empty building in Detroit. No cameras, no visitors, no questions asked. $12 an hour to sit and read magazines in the early hours of the morning. It seemed like easy money, almost too good to be true. And you know what they say about things that seem too good to be true, don't you? But Marcus had been unemployed for 6 months, bills piling up, the pressure mounting. When you're desperate, you ignore the warning signs. Have you ever been there? That feeling that something is wrong, but you keep going anyway? On the first night, when silence filled the place and the empty corridors seemed to stretch endlessly under the pale light of the fluorescent lamps, he heard it. A whisper, weak at first, almost imperceptible. But when Marcus went upstairs to investigate, the sound became unmistakable. All the doors in the corridor began to whisper. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't his imagination. It was something much, much worse, and they all repeated the same thing. A date. March 15th, 2025. The date of that exact day. Today's date. The date of his death. What Marcus didn't know was that this building, with no signs, no windows on the upper floors, no official record on city maps, held the most disturbing secret the American government had ever tried to bury. A psychological warfare experiment from the 1980s that was never deactivated. A project that played with something no human being should manipulate: time, consciousness, and the exact moment a life ends. And now, Marcus was trapped inside it, with less than 6 hours to discover the truth before the prediction came true. Stay with me until the end, because this is the true story of how an ordinary man discovered that some buildings weren't built to protect what's inside, but to keep something locked away, forever. And what you're about to discover about Project Terminus might make you question everything you thought you knew about free will and destiny. Before I tell you what Marcus discovered in that icy basement, I need to ask you something. If this story is already giving you chills, if you're starting to wonder what you would do in his place if it's somehow touching something inside you, leave a comment below. Tell me, have you ever felt like something was warning you about the future? Have you ever had that inexplicable premonition that later came true? Or better yet, do you believe it's possible to know the date of your own death? I read every comment, every story you share, and this not only fuels this incredible community we're building together, but also shows me that I'm not alone in this search for stories that challenge our understanding of reality. And look, if you're enjoying this content, if this kind of real investigative narrative that messes with your head and your heart at the same time makes sense to you, click the like button now. It seems silly, but this simple gesture is what makes the algorithm understand that it's worth showing this video to more people. Your participation here is literally what makes this channel grow and reach other people who, like you, are looking for something beyond the superficial, something that makes them think. And if you're not yet subscribed, subscribe now and activate the bell, because every week I bring disturbing, real, documented stories that will make you question everything. I know this subject is affecting you, and I guarantee that what comes next will be even more intense. Because when Marcus descended those stairs to the basement, when he pushed open that metal door with the sign Project Terminus, Restricted Access, 1987, he had no idea that he was about to discover something the government had tried to erase from official records decades ago, something that would prove that the line between science and nightmare is much thinner than any of us would like to admit. The truth is, Marcus Hayes wasn't exactly lucky. At 34, an Iraq war veteran, he carried more than just memories of that conflict. He carried chronic insomnia, recurring nightmares, and an inner silence that no therapist in the public system could break. 6 months unemployed, bills piling up, the landlord knocking on the door demanding rent. That kind of pressure that erodes your dignity day after day until you find yourself making choices you never imagined making. And it was exactly in this state of mind, in this financial and emotional vulnerability, that Marcus saw the ad on Craigslist. Night watchman, No experience necessary, cash payment. No references required, no complicated questions, just show up and start. Marcus found it strange, of course. Anyone with even a modicum of survival instinct would. But when you're desperate, when the transformation of your situation depends on any opportunity that comes along, you ignore that inner voice. You silence the warning signs. He called the number. He was instructed to meet at a cafe in downtown Detroit the next day at noon sharp. And that's where it all really began. The interviewer was a man in an impeccable grey suit, his hair perfectly combed back, without a single facial expression that betrayed emotion. He never gave his name, never showed identification. He simply sat down in front of Marcus, ordered a black coffee, and got straight to the point. 3 questions. Only 3. The first, do you have a family? Marcus replied that he didn't. His parents had died when he was young. No siblings, no wife, no children. Alone in the world. The man wrote something down. Second question, do you believe in ghosts? Marcus almost laughed. After everything he had seen in Iraq, after the things he had witnessed, he had learned that the real horrors were very real, very human. No, he answered firmly. The man nodded, seeming satisfied. Third question, the strangest. Can you remain silent? Marcus looked him in the eye and simply said, yes. He was hired on the spot. The instructions were absurdly simple. Arrive at 11 p.m. sharp. Make hourly rounds through the building's 6 floors. Never, under any circumstances, attempt to open locked doors. Leave at 6 a.m. Nothing more, no reports, no cameras to monitor, no supervisor to report to. Payment would be in cash, delivered every Friday in a sealed envelope left at reception. $12 an hour, $48 a night, almost $1,500 a month. For a man with no income, that was the difference between the street and a roof over his head. The building was located on the industrial outskirts of Detroit, an area the city had essentially abandoned. A 6-story concrete block with no signs identifying what it was or what it was for. No windows on the upper floors, only small openings on the ground floor, all with bars. It looked like a fortress or a prison. Marcus should have noticed. He should have questioned why an empty building needed surveillance. He should have asked why all the doors were locked if there was nothing to protect. He should have noticed the way the man in the suit watched him, as if assessing not his abilities, but his fragility, his loneliness, his lack of connection to the outside world. But Marcus didn't ask any of that, because when you're at rock bottom, when the journey there has been too long and painful, you just grab the rope they throw you, even without knowing who's holding it on the other end. And that's exactly what he did. He accepted the job, he signed a document he barely read, and he prepared for his first night in that place which, unbeknownst to him, held revelations that would challenge everything he thought he understood about reality, time, and the inner workings of the American government's secret operations. The first night began exactly as Marcus had expected. Absolute silence. That kind of heavy stillness you only find in completely abandoned places, where even the sound of your own footsteps feels like an invasion. He arrived at 11 o'clock, unlocked the main door with the key he had received, entered, and felt that still, dense air, heavy with mold and accumulated dust. The reception area was minimalist, almost empty. An old metal table, a creaking chair, a fluorescent lamp flickering occasionally. Nothing more. Marcus settled in, picked up the magazine he had brought, and decided that this would be a piece of cake. Easy money, no complications. The first round took place at midnight. He climbed the concrete stairs, flashlight in hand, methodically surveying each floor. Empty corridors stretched in both directions, doors numbered 101 to 600, and 24, all locked, all identical. Dark wood, rusty metal doorknobs, small plaques with numbers worn by time. The walls were peeling, the hospital green paint flaking off in irregular strips. The smell was strange, a mixture of mold and something chemical that Marcus couldn't identify, something that stung slightly in his nostrils. He made mental notes, checked each floor, returned to the reception area. Everything normal, nothing happening, exactly as it should be. It was 2:17 a.m. when Everything changed. Marcus was sitting in the reception area, leafing through the magazine without really reading, when he heard it. A sound, weak, almost imperceptible, like the wind passing through a crack. But there was no wind inside. He raised his head, paying attention. The sound was coming from upstairs, from the second floor. A whisper. Marcus felt that old soldier's instinct awaken within him. Something was wrong. He grabbed his flashlight, climbed the stairs slowly, each step measured. Controlled. The sound became clearer as he approached. It wasn't just one whisper. There were several, overlapping voices, all murmuring something he still couldn't distinguish. He reached the second-floor hallway and stopped. The whisper was coming from door number 201. Marcus walked towards it, his heart beginning to race. It didn't make sense. The building was empty. It should be empty. He pressed his ear to the cold wood and froze completely. The voice was clear now, repeating, insisting. March 15, 2025. March 15, 2025. Today's date. The date of that exact day. Marcus instinctively recoiled, his breath quickening. He tried the doorknob. Locked. He took 2 steps to door number 202. The same whisper. The same date. He ran to 203. Same thing. 204. 205. 206. All the doors in the hallway. All whispering. All repeating that cursed date. The impact of this discovery hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. His hands began to tremble. This wasn't possible. It wasn't rational. But it was happening. He ran down the stairs, almost tripping over his own feet, and grabbed the phone the man in the suit had given him. He dialed the number. It rang. It rang. It rang. No one answered. He tried again. Nothing. The line just rang in the void. No voicemail, no automated message. Marcus threw the phone on the table. Feeling the panic begin to escalate, he was alone, completely alone in that place, and that place, whatever it was, knew he was there. It knew, and it was whispering. It was warning. It was announcing something. Marcus's mindset, trained in combat zones, tried to overcome his fear. He took a deep breath. He tried to rationalize. Maybe it was recordings. Maybe some sound system installed to test new security guards. Maybe it was an elaborate prank. But none of these explanations made sense. Why? Today's date? Why all the doors at the same time? And why that obsessive repetition, like a macabre mantra echoing through the empty corridors? He looked at his watch. 2:35 in the morning. There were still more than 3 hours left until the shift ended. 3 hours trapped in that place with voices that shouldn't exist, whispering truths he didn't want to hear. Marcus made a decision at that moment. A decision that would completely change the course of that night and, unbeknownst to him, his entire life. He wasn't just going to passively complete his shift. He wasn't going to pretend nothing was happening. He was a soldier. He was trained to investigate, to confront, to uncover the hidden truth, even when it was terrifying. And if that building held secrets, if those voices meant something, he was going to find out what. Even if it cost him his sanity. Even if the journey to the revelation took him to places no human being should ever know. If you're feeling what Marcus felt in that moment, if you have that chill running down your spine imagining what was to come, then you definitely need to subscribe to this channel. Because what Marcus was about to discover behind the scenes of that cursed building went beyond any conspiracy, beyond any experiment. It was something that defied the very laws of time and human consciousness. Marcus wanted to escape. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to run away from that place, grab his things, and never look back. But something kept him there, trapped in that impossible reality. It was a strange mixture of pure fear and that morbid curiosity that only those who have faced danger head-on can understand. A soldier's curiosity, the need to know what lies behind the threat, to understand the enemy before fighting it. Marcus took a deep breath, forced his rational mind to take control of the panic, and made a decision. He would investigate. He would get to the bottom of it, no matter what happened. That's when he remembered something. The map he'd received with his job instructions. A simple sketch of the building showing the 6 floors. But there was something strange about that map, something Marcus hadn't paid attention to before. He pulled the folded paper from his pocket and examined it in the dim light of the reception area. 6 floors, from the 1st to the 6th. But when he looked at the old elevator in the corner of the hall, he noticed something that wasn't on the map. An additional button. The letter S, basement. Why would an abandoned building have a basement that didn't appear on the official plan? The obvious answer struck him like a bolt of lightning, because they wanted it to remain hidden. Marcus walked to the elevator and pressed the button. The rusty doors slammed shut with a sharp creak that echoed through the empty hall. He stepped inside, hesitated for a second with his finger on the S button, then pressed it. The elevator descended slowly, groaning and rattling, making a noise that suggested it hadn't been used in years. When the doors opened again, Marcus found himself facing something completely different from anything he had seen on the upper floors. The corridor ahead was clean, modern. The walls didn't have that peeling paint, but a clinical, almost hospital-like white. The floor was impeccable industrial linoleum. Fluorescent lights flickered at irregular intervals, creating that characteristic buzzing sound. There was no mold down here, no accumulated dust. This place was used, or had been used recently. Marcus advanced slowly, each step echoing in the narrow corridor, and at the end, like a silent sentinel, was a heavy metal door. A plaque was affixed to it, and when Marcus got close enough to read it, he felt his blood run cold. Terminus Project, Restricted Access, 1987. The door was ajar. Just a few centimeters, but enough for a faint light to seep through the crack. Marcus pushed the door carefully. It opened without resistance, revealing a room that seemed frozen in time. Dusty files piled on metal shelves, old computers, those huge models from the 80s, still turned on, their phosphorescent green screens displaying lines of incomprehensible code. There was a whiteboard covered in equations and diagrams that Marcus didn't understand, and on the walls, scattered almost chaotically, were photographs, hundreds of them, attached with tacks, some overlapping, others yellowed with age. Marcus approached, examining the photos. They were ordinary people, men, women, children, faces of different ages, ethnicities, eras. All the photos had something in common, a small white label stuck to the lower right corner. Marcus picked one at random. The photo showed a middle-aged woman smiling at the camera. The label read, Sarah Mitchell, 12/08/1989. He picked another, a young man. Robert Chen, 23/11/1993. Another, a child. Emma Rodriguez, 07/04/2001. And then the truth hit him with the force of a devastating revelation. Those were not dates of birth, they were dates of death. He kept flipping through the photos, his hands trembling more and more, and that's when he saw it. In the middle of that sea of unfamiliar faces, there was a photo of him. Marcus Hayes. Taken yesterday when he first entered the building to get his keys. He remembered that moment perfectly, that T-shirt he was wearing, and there, stuck to the photo with clinical precision, was the label, Marcus Hayes, 03/15/2025. Today. Today's date. His legs went weak. He leaned on the table, his breathing quickened, his mind struggling to process the impact of that discovery. With trembling hands, Marcus began searching for more photos. He found an entire section dedicated to guards. He recognized some faces of men who, he now realized, had the same tired look as him. All with labels, all with dates. He picked up the most recent one, a man of approximately 40 years old. David Sutton, 01/18/2025, 2 months ago. Marcus searched the nearby files until he found a report. David Sutton, found dead in the 3rd-floor break room, hanged. Official conclusion, suicide. But now Marcus knew the truth. It hadn't been suicide. It had been the fulfillment of a prophecy, a prediction that came true. The terrible truth was revealed to him like a curtain being pulled back. That building wasn't an abandoned warehouse. It wasn't a forgotten facility. It was an experiment, an active, ongoing experiment using real people as guinea pigs. And Marcus was just the latest, the next victim of something he didn't yet fully understand, but which clearly involved predicting, documenting, and perhaps even causing the deaths of specific people on specific dates. His journey there hadn't been luck. It had been selection. He had been chosen. Why? For what purpose? And more importantly, was there still time to escape this death sentence whispered through the doors? Desperate, his heart pounding so hard, it felt like it was going to burst out of his chest, Marcus frantically searched through the files. He pulled dusty folders from shelves, opened rusty drawers, and scattered documents across the desk. And that's when he found it. A thick folder with a faded red stamp on the cover. Department of Defense, classified, Project Terminus. His hands trembled as he opened it. The first pages contained internal memos dated 1984. The project's stated objective was audacious, almost insane, to create a psychic surveillance system capable of predicting threats to national security before they happened. And how to do that? By predicting deaths, by anticipating the exact moment when specific targets would cease to exist. Marcus flipped through the pages quickly, absorbing fragmented information. The first test subjects were prisoners, death row inmates who voluntarily participated in exchange for a commutation of sentence that never came. Then came psychiatric patients from state institutions, people without family, without connections, without anyone to ask questions. And finally, disposable people from society, homeless people, addicts, veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder whom no one else wanted to help. People like him, Marcus realized with a chill. Lonely, vulnerable, desperate people. The experiment worked, but it worked in a way that scientists never predicted. The reports described something that defied all known laws of physics and consciousness. The subjects exposed to the Project Terminus protocol developed a temporal connection. When they died, their consciousness didn't simply cease. It remained trapped in the exact moment of death, creating a kind of echo that reverberated backward in time. As if the traumatic intensity of that final moment created a rupture in temporal linearity, allowing consciousness to shout a warning to its past self. The voices Marcus heard whispering through the doorways weren't ghosts in the traditional sense. They weren't spirits. Trapped between worlds, they were the experiment's own victims, their future selves trapped in an infinite time loop, replaying their death dates backward through time, trying to warn them, trying to change what had already happened, but always failing, because the warning itself became part of the cycle, the self-fulfilling prophecy. You hear your death date, you panic, you make fear-driven decisions, and those very decisions lead you to your predicted fate. Marcus read more, and the truth became even more disturbing. He was in the system now. From the moment he accepted the job, from the moment he signed that document, from the moment he first entered the building. His death had already happened in some future timeline. It was already recorded, documented, echoing back. That photo of him with the label wasn't a prediction. It was a record, a fait accompli that simply hadn't yet occurred in his present timeline. His transformation from a living person to a temporal echo was already underway. And here was the ultimate horror of the discovery. The building didn't actively kill anyone. There were no hidden killers. There were no death traps. There was no poison in the air. The building simply recorded the inevitable. It documented deaths that had already happened in future layers of time. It was an observer, not an executor. But this observation, this foreknowledge, created such a powerful psychological prison that it made death inevitable. The psychological impact of knowing when you're going to die was the real weapon. Fear was the real killer. Marcus stopped, took a deep breath, and forced his combat-trained mind to think clearly even amidst the panic. There was a crucial question there, a question that all the previous guards apparently hadn't asked, or hadn't had time to ask. What if the cycle could be broken? What if knowing the prophecy didn't necessarily mean fulfilling it? What if Marcus could make completely different decisions than his future self had made? Would that create a paradox? Or would it create a new timeline? He looked at the clock on the wall. 4:43 in the morning. Less than 2 hours until 6 when his shift was supposed to end. Less than 2 hours until dawn. Less than 2 hours until the end of the date marked on his tag. His supposed death was scheduled to happen today, March 15th, 2025. But there was no specific time on the tag. Did that mean he had until midnight? Or did it mean that the moment was already rapidly approaching? Marcus made a decision in that instant. A decision that would define not only whether he would live or die, but what kind of person he truly was. He would not passively accept that temporal sentence. He would not simply wait for fate to unfold. If that cursed experiment had the power to predict deaths, then he, Marcus Hayes, war veteran, survivor, fighter, would prove that free will still existed. That conscious, courageous, and unexpected decisions could change even what seemed to be written in the stars. His journey up to that point had been marked by losses and giving up, but that night would be different. That night, he would fight against time itself. If you're rooting for Marcus to succeed, if you feel that this battle against a predetermined fate resonates with something inside you, then subscribe to this channel now, because what Marcus did next was something none of the previous victims had the courage to attempt. With adrenaline coursing through every cell of his body, Marcus ran from the basement room towards the main exit. His footsteps echoed down the stairs as he climbed 2 steps at a time, his heart racing, his mind focused on only one thing: getting out of there. He reached the main door and pulled the handle forcefully. Locked. Impossible. He pulled again, throwing all his weight against the metal door. Nothing. The lock wouldn't budge an inch. Marcus stepped back, his breath quickening, and kicked the door with all his might. Pain shot up his leg, but the door remained intact, motionless, as if it had been sealed from the outside. He tried the phone again. Nothing. He picked up his own cell phone. No signal. That didn't make sense. He had a signal when he arrived a few hours ago. He dialed 911 anyway, hoping the emergency call would go through. The screen immediately showed failed call. Marcus threw the phone to the ground in frustration and looked around for alternatives. The windows. He ran to the nearest window in the entrance hall and with a metal chair broke the glass. The shards exploded outwards with a deafening noise that echoed through the empty building. But when Marcus tried to climb through the hole in the window, he froze. There were steel bars outside, thick industrial bars that he swore he hadn't seen when he entered the building. How hadn't he noticed them before? He was trapped, completely trapped in that cursed place, and the clock continued to tick inexorably toward dawn, toward the date marked on his photograph. Marcus leaned against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the cold floor, trying to control his breathing, trying to think. That's when he heard it. A different sound. A slow, metallic creaking coming from above. He raised his head, listening. Another creak. And another. The doors. The locked doors of the upper floors were opening. It was 5:15 in the morning when Marcus climbed the stairs again, his military instincts fully activated. Every sense was on high alert, every muscle prepared to react. He reached the second floor and saw. Door 21, which hours ago had been firmly locked, was now wide open. He approached slowly, peering inside. An empty room, peeling walls, cracked concrete floor. Nothing else. He went to 22. Open as well. Empty. 23. Same thing. One by one, all the doors in the hallway were now open, creaking softly as if moved by an invisible breeze. Marcus entered room 207, his flashlight illuminating every corner, and that's when he saw it. On the back wall, scrawled with what appeared to be dried brown blood, was a message. "They lie." He moved on to the next room. Another message, this time scratched into the wall with something sharp, perhaps a fingernail. "It's not real." Room after room, floor after floor, Marcus found more. "You can get out," written in charcoal in trembling letters. "Don't believe the date," etched deep into the plaster of the wall. "Fear is the trap," painted with faded red paint. The last words of each victim of Project Terminus. desperate warnings left by people who had discovered the truth too late, messages from tormented souls who, in their last moments of clarity before the end, tried to warn those who came after. And the more Marcus read those messages, the more the truth crystallized in his mind with painful clarity. He understood. He finally understood. The self-fulfilling prophecy. The experiment had no power to predict deaths. There was no real, temporal connection. There were no consciousnesses echoing from the future. It was all psychological manipulation. The experiment didn't predict deaths, it caused them. The methodology was diabolical in its simplicity. You tell a person when they are going to die. You put them in a controlled, isolated environment with no way out. You plant evidence that confirms the prediction, and then you wait. Fear does the rest of the work. Fear breeds panic. Panic leads to irrational decisions. Irrational decisions lead to accidents, suicide, heart attacks induced by extreme stress, or simply the person becomes so paralyzed by terror that they become vulnerable to anything. The deaths were not inevitable. They were induced, caused by the very belief in the prophecy. The previous victims died not because it was their destiny, but because they believed it was. And this belief became such a powerful mental prison that death became the only way out their terrified minds could see. Marcus's death was scheduled for today not because it was inevitable according to some cosmic or temporal law. It was scheduled because someone wanted him to believe it was. And if he believed it, if he let fear take control, if he allowed the prophecy to dictate his actions, then yes, he would die today, not by fate, but by choice. An unconscious choice, perhaps, but a choice nonetheless. The transformation from victim to statistic depended on only one thing: accepting the narrative they had constructed for him. Marcus stopped in the middle of the fourth-floor hallway, surrounded by open doors and warning messages. He had a clear choice now. He could remain afraid. He could accept the sentence. He could passively wait for the predicted fate to unfold. Or he could do what those messages screamed at him to do: not believe, not give in to fear, find the way out that surely existed. Because if all of this was a psychological experiment, then there were operators. There were people monitoring. There was a way out. You just needed to think differently, act differently, break the pattern that all the previous victims followed. 5:47, 13 minutes to 6 in the morning. Marcus was back at the reception desk, sitting in the creaking chair, trying to keep his breathing under control, when the old intercom hanging on the wall crackled. That dusty device, which he wasn't even sure worked, came to life with a characteristic hiss of old equipment. Marcus looked at it, tense, and then he heard the voice. But it wasn't just any voice, it was his own voice, slightly distorted by static, but unmistakably his. "Marcus, don't leave." The voice sounded tired, desperate. "If you leave, you die. The car, the road, the truck won't stop. I've been through this, I am you need to stay." Marcus felt every hair on his body stand on end. This wasn't a recording. There was real urgency there, raw emotion, terror. It was him speaking. But how? From the future? From some alternate timeline? From within the experiment's own system? The voice continued, each word laden with a weight that cut like a blade. "They're waiting for you outside. They want to document it. They want to prove it works. If you leave at 6 o'clock as planned, you die. Stay until 7. Break the pattern. Please." The voice faltered, full of emotion. "I don't want to die again." Silence. The intercom returned to its neutral hiss and then fell completely silent. Marcus froze in his chair, his mind racing in 1,000 different directions. That voice was his. He knew it with absolute certainty. He recognized every inflection, every tone. But what did it mean? Was it real? Was it another layer of psychological manipulation? A recording made when he entered the building, processed by some artificial intelligence software and played back at a calculated moment for maximum emotional impact. He glanced at the front door, then at the clock. 5:52, 8 minutes to 6. His combat-trained mind, accustomed to making decisions under pressure, began to calculate the options with surgical precision. Option A, trust the voice. Stay in the building beyond the planned time. Wait until 7 or later, but that meant remaining a prisoner by choice. It meant accepting that he had no control. It meant giving in to fear and manipulation. Option B, ignore the voice. Leave exactly at 6 o'clock as stipulated in the original work instructions. Defy the warning. But that meant risking that the prophecy was correct, that there really was a car waiting, a road, a truck that wouldn't stop. It meant betting his life against a warning that seemed to come from his own future self. Marcus's rational mindset fought against his survival instinct, each pulling in a different direction. And it was in that moment of maximum tension, with the clock striking 5:55, that the revelation struck Marcus with the force of a lightning bolt cutting through the night sky. He realized the truth. Both choices were his. Both options had been foreseen, calculated, incorporated into the design of the experiment. To stay or to leave, fear or courage. Both kept the system running. Both fueled the machine. Because no matter which choice he made within that false binary, the experiment would win. If he stayed, he would prove that fear worked. If he left and died, he would prove that the prediction worked. The experiment was designed to have no way out. The only way to win a rigged game is to refuse to play by the established rules. The only way to escape a psychological trap is to do the completely unpredictable, something the experiment's operators didn't anticipate, something that would break the pattern all the previous victims followed. Marcus stood up from his chair, determination burning in his chest like fire. 5:58. 2 minutes to 6. 2 minutes to the critical moment. Marcus Hayes made a decision in that instant that no previous victim of Project Terminus had ever made. He wasn't going to passively wait until 7. He wasn't going to rush out the front door at 6. He was going to take the third option, the option that wasn't on the menu, the option that defied the very structure of the experiment. He was going back underground. I was going to go to the Project Terminus room, and I was going to destroy everything, every file, every computer, every piece of evidence of that damned experiment. If that place had power over him, it was because it had information. You had records. You had the infrastructure that sustained the illusion, and Marcus was going to burn it all to ashes. He ran down the stairs, taking 2 steps at a time, flashlight in hand. The elevator would be faster, but elevators can be controlled remotely. Stairs were a safe bet. He reached the basement, breathless, pushed open the metal door of Project Terminus, and entered the room that now seemed different, less frightening, more vulnerable. Because Marcus was no longer afraid. He was angry. And anger, channeled correctly, is a powerful tool for transformation. 5:59. 1 minute to 6. 1 minute until the moment he was supposed to have to make the fatal decision. But Marcus had already made his decision. And its impact would be felt not only on his own journey, but potentially on that of everyone who came after. He looked around the room, identifying targets. The old computers still turned on. The filing cabinets, the whiteboard with equations, the photographs on the walls. All of this needed to be destroyed. If you're feeling the power of this turnaround, if you understand that sometimes the only way to win is to completely change the rules of the game, then subscribe to this channel now. Because what Marcus did next not only saved his life, but exposed a truth that the government tried to keep hidden for decades. Marcus scanned the basement room with the eyes of a predator, identifying its prey. And there, in the farthest corner, partially hidden behind a filing cabinet, was the heart of the system. An old server, one of those industrial models from the 80s, as big as a refrigerator, with green lights flashing in a hypnotic sequence. The low, constant hum it emitted was almost imperceptible, but now that Marcus was paying attention, he realized that sound had been there all along. Still processing, still recording, still keeping the illusion of Project Terminus alive, still fueling the cycle of fear that had killed so many people over the decades. Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed the nearest metal chair, lifted it above his head, and began to destroy everything. The first monitor exploded in a shower of glass and sparks when the chair slammed against the screen. The sound of the impact echoed through the room like a cry of liberation. He moved on to the second monitor, then the third. He smashed every screen, every control panel, every piece of equipment he could reach. He ripped cables from the walls with brute force, colored wires unraveling in clumps as occasional sparks illuminated the basement. He tore up files, scattering pages across the floor like macabre confetti. Decades of data, of documented deaths, of destroyed lives, all turning to trash beneath his hands. And then Marcus found the generator, a heavy piece of equipment installed in a separate compartment, powering the entire building's independent electrical system. He located the main lever, a red and black piece, with a faded warning that read, "Shut down only in emergency." Marcus pulled with all his might. The mechanical sound of the shutdown was followed by a sudden silence. The flickering server lights went out. The constant hum ceased, and the entire building, from the basement to the 6th floor, plunged into absolute darkness. Silence. Total silence. And then Marcus realized. The whispers had stopped. That constant murmur coming from the doors, that obsessive repetition of the date, that temporal echo that had tormented every moment since it began, it had all ceased. It was as if the building had exhaled a final sigh and finally rested. In the complete darkness, only his breathing and the beating of his own heart were audible. Marcus stood still for a moment, processing the change. He felt something change. It wasn't something physical, nothing that could be measured or quantified. It was a profound, almost spiritual sensation, as if an invisible pressure that had been compressing his chest, his lungs, his very soul since the moment he entered that place had finally disappeared. The air felt lighter now, breathing was easier, and time, which had seemed distorted and manipulated throughout that endless night, began to flow normally again. Seconds were seconds again. Minutes were minutes. The future was once again uncertain, undetermined, open, exactly as it should be. Marcus looked at the luminous watch on his wrist. 6 minutes past 4 in the morning. He had passed the appointed time. He had passed the critical moment of 6 o'clock. He was alive, breathing, conscious, and the experiment had failed. For the first time in all those decades of secret operation, someone had broken the cycle. Someone had refused the role of victim and chosen to be the destroyer of the system. He walked to the stairs, his flashlight illuminating the path through the total darkness. He climbed slowly now, without haste, without fear. Each step was an affirmation of life, of choice, of regained free will. He reached the main door and, almost unsurprisingly, found it unlocked. The doorknob turned easily under his hand. He pushed the door open and went out. Outside, the sun was rising over Detroit. Golden rays cut across the industrial horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. The morning air was fresh, clean, full of promise for a new day. And there, parked on the street in front of the building, was a grey car. The same discreet model that people in clandestine operations always use. The door opened and the man in the suit got out. The same man who had interviewed Marcus. He held a tablet in his hand, his eyes fixed on the screen, and when he looked up and saw Marcus standing there, alive, whole, his expression was one of complete confusion. He was waiting for a body, waiting for data confirming yet another death, waiting for validation of the experiment. Marcus walked straight up to him, without looking away, without hesitating. When he was just a few meters away, he stopped and said in a calm, firm voice, imbued with an authority that only comes from someone who has faced death and won, "It's over. I burned everything. All the files, all the servers, the whole system. Your damned experiment is over." The man in the suit stared at him for a long moment. His expression went through several emotions in rapid succession: anger, frustration, disbelief, and, surprisingly, something that seemed like admiration. He slowly put the tablet away and whispered, almost to himself, "You shouldn't be alive." Marcus smiled for the first time in hours, a genuine smile full of relief and triumph. And yet, he said with palpable satisfaction. "Here I am." Marcus never saw the man in the suit again. After that brief encounter on the morning of March 15th, the man simply got into his grey car and drove away, leaving Marcus standing on the sidewalk as the sun continued to rise over the sleeping city. There were no threats, no warnings, just a heavy silence and the mutual understanding that something fundamental had broken that night. Marcus also never received the promised payment. No envelope with money appeared. No contact was made. It was as if the job had never happened, as if that night had been an isolated nightmare outside the normal flow of reality. But Marcus couldn't simply move on. In the following days, driven by an almost obsessive need to understand what had happened, he began to investigate. He scoured the deep web. He searched for leaked government documents. He followed clues in obscure forums frequented by conspiracy theorists and former intelligence agency employees. And he found it. Fragments. Pieces of a truth far larger and more disturbing than he had imagined. Project Terminus had been officially shut down in 1993, according to classified documents leaked by an anonymous whistleblower in 2012. The official justification was that the project had not produced scientifically valid results, and that ethical considerations required its immediate cancellation. But the truth, as Marcus discovered, was quite different. Clandestine operations continued, not under the official name of Project Terminus, but under dozens of other names, other codes, other budgets hidden in black funding lines. The building in Detroit was just one of 6 sites still active in the United States. There were others in Nevada, Montana, Florida, Texas, and Maine, all operating in the shadows, all conducting variations of the same macabre experiment. And the most surprising part? They had all been deactivated in convenient accidents in recent years. A structural fire here, an urban demolition order there, an environmental contamination investigation over there. Each site eliminated in a way that wouldn't raise suspicions, that wouldn't generate questions. It was as if someone at some level of government or intelligence had finally decided that the experiment had gone too far and needed to be erased from history. Marcus dug deeper. He needed to know if there were others like him, others who had survived, and he found 3. 3 guards who, against all odds, had broken the cycle and lived to tell the tale. He contacted them through secure channels, encrypted conversations, discreet meetings in public places where they could speak without being overheard. Each story was different, but they all shared the same common thread. Each survivor had broken the pattern in some dramatic way. One of them, a man, named Robert from Nevada, had set the entire building on fire when he realized the manipulation. Another, James from Florida, had called the local press in the middle of the night, making so much noise that the operators were forced to abort. And a woman, Catherine from Texas, had taken a Catholic priest with her on shift, an impulsive decision based on pure intuition that ended up saving her life because the presence of an outside witness completely invalidated the experiment. They all did the unexpected. They all refused to play by the established rules, and the more Marcus talked to them, the more the ultimate truth crystallized. The prediction only worked when you believed in it, when you allowed fear to control your actions, your decisions, your mindset. The so-called psychic system had no real power to predict the future. It manipulated the present through belief. It was a sophisticated psychological trick, supported by decades of research in mind warfare and behavioral control. Once you understood this, once you broke the illusion, the power vanished like smoke. But one question continued to haunt Marcus. The voices, those whispers coming from the doorways, obsessively repeating dates. What were they really? He still wasn't sure. Part of him, the part that had seen inexplicable things in the war, believed they were somehow real, genuine echoes of past victims, their consciousnesses trapped in the trauma of that place, reverberating through time like ripples on a lake. Part of him, the rational and trained part, believed it was technology, carefully calibrated audio frequencies to induce auditory hallucinations, subliminal suggestions amplified by the fear and sensory deprivation of the controlled environment. But the scariest part of this whole journey of discovery, Marcus still heard whispers sometimes, not every day, not all the time, but at random moments, usually in the early hours of the morning, when the world was quiet and his mind was vulnerable. And now the whispers were different. They no longer repeated the date of his supposed death. They spoke of future dates, decades ahead, years he hadn't yet lived, events that hadn't yet happened, as if he had become part of the system by destroying it, as if, by breaking the cycle, he had inadvertently connected to it in a new and permanent way. It was as if conquering death once had marked him forever, transformed into something between observer and participant in a temporal reality that most people never perceive. And Marcus didn't know if this was a gift or a curse. If you're realizing that some victories come at a price we only understand later, if you feel that Marcus's journey resonates with something profound about how we face our own fears and destinies, then subscribe to this channel now, because what Marcus does today with this knowledge will show you that surviving is only the beginning of true transformation. 3 weeks after that transformative night, the building was demolished. Marcus learned of this through a brief news item in the local Detroit newspaper. The headline simply read, "Abandoned building demolished in urban renewal program." There was a photo showing heavy machinery reducing that concrete block to rubble. No mention of what had happened there. No reference to the years of secret experiments. Not a word about the lives lost within those walls. Just another old building being removed to make way for progress. The official story was clean, simple, convenient, and completely false. The records of Project Terminus remain classified to this day. Marcus tried to reach the press in the following months. He contacted investigative journalists, websites specializing in government whistleblowing, even television programs focused on conspiracy theories. Everyone showed initial interest. Everyone asked questions. But when it came time to publish, the answer was always the same. There wasn't enough concrete evidence. The photos Marcus had seen had been destroyed along with the servers. The documents he had read existed only in his memory. And memory, however vivid, is not evidence that editors are willing to risk lawsuits to defend. The truth, Marcus learned, doesn't always win simply by being true. Sometimes it needs something more. Sometimes it remains buried because it's too inconvenient to bring to light. Today, Marcus lives in a small town in Oregon, a quiet place surrounded by mountains and forests, where the pace of life is slow and people don't ask many questions about each other's past. He no longer works as a security guard. He found a job in a local carpentry shop, working with his hands, creating tangible and real things. There's something therapeutic about transforming raw wood into functional furniture, about seeing the direct impact of his work. It's the complete opposite of that night in the building where everything was manipulation, illusion, and invisible fear. Marcus doesn't talk about that night. Often. Most people wouldn't understand, they wouldn't believe it. Or worse, they would believe it for the wrong reasons, turning his experience into sensationalist entertainment. But for those who truly want to listen, for those who approach with genuine respect and sincere curiosity, he tells his story. Every detail, every revelation, every decision that saved his life. And what Marcus learned that night fundamentally changed how he sees the world and how he lives each day. He realized something profound about human nature and our most primal fears. Our greatest fear isn't really death itself, it's the certainty of it. It's knowing exactly when. Because the moment you believe you know when you're going to die, something inside you dies prematurely. You stop making plans. You stop dreaming. You stop fully living each present moment because you're always counting down the days until the predicted end. The date becomes a mental prison stronger than any physical chain could be. The building didn't kill people through force or violence. There were no lethal traps or toxic substances. Fear killed. Fear planted through prophecy, amplified by isolation, consolidated by meticulous psychological manipulation. And that is perhaps the most important lesson that emerges from this disturbing story. No matter what the future whispers to you, whether through literal voices or those inner voices of doubt and despair, no matter what negative prophecy you have heard about your death, your failure, your inevitable end, you always have a choice. You can believe that narrative and let it dictate your actions, turning the prophecy into reality, through your own surrender. Or you can do the unexpected. You can break the pattern. You can refuse the victim role they tried to write for you. Marcus did the unexpected that night. And not only did he survive, but he completely transformed the trajectory of his life. Today he carries invisible scars. Yes, he still hears those. Occasional whispers that connect him to something beyond normal comprehension, but he also carries an unwavering certainty that destiny is not fixed, that courageous decisions have real power, that the mindset with which you face the impossible determines whether you will be consumed by it or become greater through it, and that certainty is worth more than any fortune or fame could ever be worth. Marcus's journey from the back rooms of a secret government experiment to a life of relative peace in Oregon is living proof that transformation is possible even in the darkest circumstances. That when you find the hidden truth behind the manipulations that try to control you, that truth sets you free. And that sometimes the greatest courage lies not in facing death, but in facing the fear of death and discovering that it has no real power beyond what you choose to give it. And you? Have you heard whispers about your future? Have you let the fear of something that hasn't happened yet control your life, your decisions, your dreams? Think about it for a second. How many times have you stopped yourself from doing something important because an inner voice whispered that you were going to fail? How many opportunities have you missed because you believed a negative prophecy that you yourself created in your head? Leave a comment here about something you're afraid will happen, but that might just be another whisper trying to hold you back. Let's break this cycle together. And if you've made it this far, if this story really touched something inside you, write, "The future is not written." I want to know that you understood the message. Look, if this story made you think differently about fear and destiny, if it made you question the voices that try to define who you are or what you can become, then subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell. Because every week I bring you real stories like this one, stories that will make you question everything you think you know. About reality, about power, about the behind-the-scenes things the world prefers to keep hidden. And leave a like too, because this kind of deep content, which truly seeks connection and genuine reflection, needs your support to reach more people who, like you, are looking for something beyond the superficial. And look, there's a video right here that perfectly complements this topic. It's about how to identify when you're being psychologically manipulated and what to do to regain control of your own narrative. Click and continue watching because this journey of self-discovery and liberation is just beginning. Until next time. And always remember, the future is not written yet.